This week, Pope Francis's visit challenges the international community. Work begins on a new sainthood cause. And we ask just how the Vatican studies miracles. Hello and welcome to another edition of Vatican Connections. Now we're going to talk to a renowned Vaticanist about how the Vatican studies miracles and other supernatural phenomenon. But first, let's look at some more human phenomenon. So first up, this week, Pope Francis visited the Greek island of Lesbos last Saturday. On the return flight, he had 12 extra passengers with him, Syrian refugees. The group was made up of 3 families and included 6 children. They met with media this week to share their stories. Now, they asked to be identified only by their first names. Hassan and Noor are both engineers. They have a 2-year-old son, Riyadh. They left Syria after being stopped by ISIS fighters. Hassan was told he would have to fight, and instead, the family fled. Rami and Suhila have 2 teenage sons and 1 daughter. Rami was a teacher in Syria. Osama and Wafa have 2 children, 6 and 8. Osama told reporters, "We want peace in Syria so we can go home." Now, the 3 families have several things in common. They're all Muslim, their homes were bombed, and they arrived in Greece on an overloaded rubber boat from Turkey. When asked their thoughts on Pope Francis, Hassan said, "We are Muslim, and our own people did not deal with us like the Pope did." The Sant'Egidio community helped the Vatican screen the refugees in Greece and pick families to whom Greek and Italian authorities would be willing to issue travel documents in time for the papal flight. Greek authorities insisted they had to pick families who arrived in Greece before March 20th. Now, that's the date that an agreement between the European Union and Turkey went into effect. Under that agreement, all new arrivals have to apply for asylum, and if their request is denied, they're deported back to Turkey. 2 Christian families were originally on the list, but they arrived after March 20th, and Greece would not give them travel papers. Here's a look now at the rest of the Pope's visit to Lesbos.
We have traveled here to look into your eyes, to hear your voices, and to hold your hands. We have traveled here to tell you that we care. We have traveled here because the world has not forgotten you. We have wept as we watched the Mediterranean Sea becoming a burial ground for your loved ones. But we also wept as we saw the hard-heartedness of our fellow brothers and sisters, your fellow brothers and sisters, close borders and turn away.
Per essere veramente solidali con chi è costretto a fuggire dalla propria terra, bisogna lavorare per rimuovere le cause di questa drammatica realtà. Non basta limitarsi a inseguire l'emergenza del momento, ma occorre sviluppare politiche di ampio respiro, non unilaterali. Prima di tutto è necessario costruire la pace là dove la guerra ha portato distruzione e morte e impedire che questo cancro si diffonda altrove. Per questo bisogna contrastare con fermezza la proliferazione e il traffico delle armi e le loro trame spesso occulte. Vanno privati di ogni sostegno quanti perseguono progetti di odio e di violenza. Va invece promossa, senza stancarsi, la collaborazione tra i paesi, le organizzazioni internazionali e le istituzioni umanitarie, non isolando, ma sostenendo chi fronteggia l'emergenza.
The world will be judged by the way it has treated you. And we will all be accountable for the way we respond to the crisis and conflict in the regions that you come from.
Also this week, the Permanent Council of the Synod of Bishops met at the Vatican. The meeting took place April 18th and 19th. Pope Francis attended both days of those meetings. Among other things, the Council looked at possible themes for the next Synod. In a statement, the Vatican said those possible themes were debated and a short list was made up to present to the Pope for his consideration. The sainthood cause for Dorothea Day is moving forward. This week, Cardinal Timothy Dolan of New York opened a canonical inquiry into Day's life. Now he will establish a commission that will gather evidence about her life to see if she lived heroic Christian virtues. This includes interviewing anyone who had personal experiences with her, and there are about 50 such people that the Archdiocese will interview. As well, her published writings will be analyzed by theologians, and her unpublished writings will also be reviewed. Day died in 1980, and a few years later, Claretian fathers began collecting materials about her and her life. In 2000, the Vatican granted a nihil obstat for her cause, and she was declared a servant of God. Day founded the Catholic Worker Movement and a House of Hospitality in 1933, and today there are Catholic worker houses around the world. And joining me is John Thavis. He is an author, a journalist, and he has just written the Vatican Prophesies, a follow-up to his book, The Vatican Diaries. Thanks so much for joining us on Vatican Connections. You just wrote the Vatican Prophecies about investigating supernatural signs, the apparitions, miracles. Give us a brief overview of the book.
The book really deals with how the Vatican tries to coordinate its investigation of what we call the supernatural. Obviously the Catholic Church has a great tradition of supernatural signs, wonders, miracles. It's founded, on many miracles. The apostolic tradition continued the miracles performed by Jesus. We have apparitions in our history, and we authenticate miracles routinely for sainthood causes. So what I wanted to do is get behind the scenes and inside the process. What does the Vatican actually do when it gets a report of an apparition? How does the Vatican go about investigating a potential miracle? What are its standards?
Okay.
What's the Vatican's view on relics?
Right.
Relics have sort of disappeared for a while. Now they're making a comeback. What does the Vatican think about that? And what does the Vatican think about exorcism?
Oh.
A lot of world headlines in newspapers say the Vatican has rediscovered exorcism. I found something a little bit different.
Miracles, apparitions, signs, it's all been part of our tradition. Has that changed over time, and is there more of a cynicism, a less of an openness to that?
Well, it's interesting. Miracles, they're the one thing that the Vatican has a very complex procedure in place for evaluating and judging. The standards are very high. And most miracles today are medical miracles.
Right.
So it's kind of easy to see where this is going.
Right.
The Vatican calls in doctors, it calls in medical records. It tries to make certain that there's no medical explanation for a cure. And once they've done that, then they can say, okay, this might be a miracle. Let's now look at the prayers where they offered to a certain saint. And that's the way they decide. In all these other things, though, apparitions or private revelations, messages from Mary or God, exorcisms, demonic possession, what I found, and it was rather surprising, was that the Vatican does not really have a set procedure for dealing with them.
Oh.
In fact, throughout its history, the Vatican has preferred that these things be dealt with locally.
Okay.
Apparitions are a good example. In the Church's history, of course, there have been many, thousands probably, Marian apparitions. but almost all of them have been at local levels. What's changed nowadays is that practically every apparition can become international.
Right.
And will become international if it gets online.
Right.
And this presents a problem to the Vatican, because the Vatican's approach to all these things has been, we go slow, we let things settle, we
Right.
don't rush into judgment, and we let things go away sometimes.
Well, one of the cases that's probably been the first to kind of become viral with the advent of the internet was Medjugorje. Do you see a difference based on what you've learned? Like, do you see a difference in how that's been approached as opposed to how other apparitions in the past have been approached?
Yes, there's a big difference. What you had happen in the 1980s and 90s was that the internet and the global communication system took Medjugorje and made it a reality available to everybody. And this drew pilgrims,
Right.
millions of pilgrims. They say 35 million pilgrims have visited Medjugorje
Wow.
since 1981.
Wow.
And the messages are relayed every single day on websites devoted to Medjugorje. So I think the Vatican's initial approach to Medjugorje, which is, you know, a village in Bosnia-Herzegovina, was simply that leave it alone, it will go away. I mean, this is a tiny village where people grew tobacco and grapes. They figured, well, just let it kind of fade into the background. Well, it didn't. It just grew bigger and bigger and bigger. And so by the time the Vatican finally got around to naming a commission to investigate it in 2010, as I say, 30 million people had already been there. And many, many, many Catholics say they were truly inspired by what they saw there.
Do you think the church is in a bit of a pickle with Medjugorje right now?
Yeah, it's in a bind. I think they're in a bind because theoretically these apparitions are still continuing.
Right.
How can the church issue a judgment on apparitions that are still supposedly going on? You have new messages every day. You know, what if the church says, yes, this seems authentic, and tomorrow, as one Vatican official put it, Mary at Medjugorje spouts some heresy? The church would never take that chance. Right. And so it's going to be very, very hard for the church to issue a definitive verdict. I have the feeling what the Vatican may do is try to downplay the events and perhaps try to remove the visionaries from the scene a little bit and have them fade into the background.
You've had the chance to watch a lot of popes do a lot of things. Francis is changing quite a bit. One of the things that's come up in conversation at the Council of Cardinals meeting especially was bishops. The profile of a bishop, the kind of information that the Congregation for Bishops should be asking when they're considering someone. Have you seen a difference in the types of bishops that are being appointed now under Pope Francis?
Yes, I have, but not all bishops, because of course there are 3,000 or 4,000 bishops in the world, and the Pope appoints a great number every year. There's no way a single man, even if he's Pope, can keep track of the resumes of candidates for all those appointments. I think he's taking a personal interest in the major archdioceses, and we saw an example of that in the archdiocese where I now reside, St. Paul, Minneapolis, where
that was an unusual situation.
It was a painful situation because Archbishop John Einstead, who had been Archbishop there until 10 months ago, was asked to resign, essentially, and he did resign. And this was in the face of the mishandling of some sex abuse cases, of bankruptcy, and of a prosecutor announcing criminal charges against the archdiocese. So things were really going badly.
Right.
And I think he had lost the trust of the people as well. Pope Francis named an intermediary, a kind of transitional figure there, an administrator, to find a new archbishop. And a funny thing happened. The administrator, Archbishop Bernard Hebda, became so popular, he seemed to be a Pope Francis bishop. And that's what people wanted. And so about a month ago, Pope Francis decided he was given a list of 3 candidates, and he said, but we have Archbishop Hebda there, who's very well liked. I'm going to make him archbishop, and he did, which was unusual because Archbishop Hebda had been pledged really to another archdiocese in the United States. So once again, Pope Francis kind of breaking the unwritten rules at the Vatican and saying, look, if we have somebody who's a good fit, let's stick with him.
Do you think we're seeing a different type of bishop being appointed in North America especially?
Well, to some degree, yes. I see it more in the choice of cardinals, actually. It's easier to see because there you see the Pope's personal choice. And this last batch of cardinals the Pope appointed a year ago, really almost to a person, were people who espoused the Pope Francis gospel, which is be close to your people, smell like the sheep, you know, take the bus instead of a limousine, live in a simple quarters, you know, don't lord it over your flock. And as I say, the people he named cardinals, almost every one of them spoke in that same vein. I think it's too early to say in the United States how that's going to fall out. And part of the reason is there's a limited field of candidates. You know, I mean, if you're appointing major archbishops, you're normally dealing with people who are already bishops as your candidates.
You're dealing with a pool that's kind of already been created for you.
The pool has been created by his two predecessors, and it's going to take years for the pool to change.
Okay. My last question. The Curia reform is still going on. What do you think we're going to see?
I think we will see, well, we've already seen part of it take place. There's been kind of coordination of offices. The grand scheme is to reduce some of the councils and pull them into a more organic type of arrangement. And I'm sure that will go forward. I think it will happen within the next year, certainly. I think the Vatican Communications agencies are well on their way now to, for better or worse, working together. Right. And that was long overdue. You know, the economic changes that he's made were made fairly early on, and I think there is where he's been most successful. Okay. In setting up, you know, new agencies to have oversight. I mean, in a way, he's found that it's easier to set up new Curia departments than to eliminate existing ones. But that's the path he's had to go.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for making time for us on this
Thank you,
whirlwind visit to our studios.
Thank you.
Let's take a look now through the Pope's agenda to see what he's been doing this week. On Sunday, the Pope celebrated Mass at St. Peter's Basilica, and during that Mass, of course, he ordained 11 new priests for the Diocese of Rome and other religious orders. In his homily, he said, "Dispense the word of God to all, that word that you yourselves have received with joy." Also on Sunday, after leading the Regina Coeli, Pope Francis reflected on his visit to the Moria refugee camp in Lesbos. CNS has details.
Ringrazio quanti hanno accompagnato con la preghiera la visita che ho compiuto ieri nell'isola di Lesbo in Grecia. Ai profughi e al popolo greco ho portato la solidarietà della Chiesa. Erano con me il patriarca ecumenico Bartolomeo e l'arcivescovo Hieronymos di Atene e tutte le Grecie, a significare l'unità nella carità di tutti i discepoli del Signore. Abbiamo visitato uno dei campi dei rifugiati. Provenivano dall'Iraq, dall'Afghanistan, dalla Siria, dall'Africa, da tanti paesi.
Father, please bless me. Please bless me because I'm Christian. Hallelujah. 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 Oh, Jesus, thank you. Thank you, God. Thank you. Thank you.
God bless you. Abbiamo salutato circa 300 di questi profughi, uno a uno, tutti e tre. Il patriarca Bartolomeo, l'arcivescovo Hieronymus e io. Tanti di loro erano bambini. Alcuni di loro, di questi bambini, hanno assistito alla morte dei genitori e di compagni. Alcuni di loro morti annegati in mare. Ho visto tanto dolore.
On Monday, Pope Francis met with the new president of the Central African Republic, Faustin Archange Touadéra. The recent elections and the electoral process in that country were discussed. The two men also discussed the importance of the international community helping the country heal from the effects of years of conflict. Wednesday was, of course, the general audience. Pope Francis continued his catechesis series on mercy, but this time turning to the danger of hypocrisy. Catholic News Service has more.
Tutti noi siamo peccatori, ma tante volte cadiamo nella tentazione dell'ipocrisia, dirò un po' di crederci migliore degli altri. Ma guarda tu il tuo peccato, tutti noi guardiamo il nostro peccato, le nostre cadute, i nostri sbagli e guardiamo il Signore. Questa è la linea di salvezza, il rapporto fra io peccatore e il Signore. Se io mi sento giusto, questo rapporto di salvezza non si dà.
On Thursday, Pope Francis met with the new nuncio to the United States, Archbishop Christophe Pierre. He also met with Archbishop Leon Kalenga, the nuncio to El Salvador and Belize, and a delegation from Caritas Italy on the occasion of their 45th anniversary. On Sunday, Pope Francis will celebrate Mass with young people for the Jubilee of Boys and Girls. Time to take a look now at who has a new job this week. The Archdiocese of Montreal has a new auxiliary bishop. Monsignor Alain Faubert becomes that city's second auxiliary. He has been a priest for the Archdiocese of Montreal since 1995 and has served in a variety of roles. Most recently, he's been a parish pastor in Saint-Germain. Pope Francis approved the election of Coptic Catholic priest Father Khaled Ayad Bichet as the new Coptic Bishop of Luxor, Egypt. And the Pope also gave his assent to the election of Bishop Felix Barakat as the new Syriac Catholic Archbishop of Homs. Now, in the Eastern churches, bishops are elected by synod, and the Pope approves their election. And that's all for this edition of Vatican Connections. Join us again next time. Until then, follow us on Twitter, check our blog for updates, or watch us on demand on Roku TV. From everyone here, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.